Good evening, everyone. It's Matt. This is the Orcs Planet, and welcome to another instalment of Imperial History. I'm going to continue reading the past 300 or so years of the history of the Empire. As before, the link to the Empire LRP wiki page that I'm reading from is below, so if you wish to read along as I talk or want to go back to it later, it's there just for you. We shall pick up directly where we left off last time. 212 to 234 YE. The reign of Empress Marika. After 3 years without an emperor or empress, the Suak Empress Marika ascended the throne. The empire was on the verge of financial collapse, and Marika's reign is remembered for her ruthless and efficient reorganization of the imperial economy. She disbanded 2 entire armies, slashed funding to the military council, gave the bourse control of a number of raw material surpluses, recognized several informal positions as imperial offices, and generally took steps to ensure the empire avoided economic disaster. 239 to 248 YE. Reign of Emperor Gunthem. The Steiner Emperor Gunthem ascended the throne after a series of successful campaigns against the Jotun barbarians. He was committed to expanding the reach of the empire, and chafed under the economic restrictions placed by his predecessor. The early part of his reign is committed to strengthening the borders of the empire, and a number of castles and fortresses were built during his reign. The latter part of his reign is known for some of the bloodiest battles in imperial history. 249 to 257 YE. Reign of Empress Brannan. The Navari Empress Brannan followed Gunthem to the throne, and was another military-minded ruler dedicated to smashing the Orcs and expanding the borders of the empire. Ultimately, her abusive attitude to the powers of the throne and allegations of improper relations with certain Eternals resulted in her being the only throne to be revoked by the Imperial Synod. Despite her failings, she showed what the empire was capable of when sufficient resources were given to its armies. Some of the most glorious battles in imperial history took place during her reign, and with her support, the Navarre in particular made great advances in their fight to destroy the Valorn and reclaim their lost cities. 257 to 281 YE. Reign of Emperor James. The Marcher Emperor James took the throne as a peacemaker, not to make peace with the barbarians, but to make peace within the empire. He was responsible for fixing the borders of the empire. 265 YE. Fixing the borders. The Senate agreed that the empire was now large enough, and argued that further expansion was counterproductive, despite vociferous argument from the Synod and the military council. Trade routes with various foreigners were established, and peace treaties were signed with various barbarians, ushering in an era of economic growth and prosperity. Some barbarians continued to threaten the borders, but the armies shifted to a more defensive role. Renewal. The renewal period started with the fixing of the borders in 265 YE, and lasted until the end of the reign of Emperor Araz. It marked a period of introspection, but also strengthened and renewed an empire ravaged by the violence and confusion of the years of turmoil. With the acceptance of the Imperial Orcs as a 10th nation, the Empire's strength appeared assured. 281 to 300 YE, the Second Interregnum. After James's reign, a period of relative peace settled on the Empire. The borders were reinforced. Relationships between the Senate, Synod and Military Council achieved a degree of status quo. The Conclave and the Bourse focused on their own interest and were free to explore new avenues. Modern scholars suggest that this was a period of increasing complacency and introspection for the Empire. But others point to the high quality of life for most citizens, the various advances in magic, the arts and technology, and consider it a golden age built on the solid foundations laid by Emperor James's reign. 300 to 318 YE. Reign of Empress Diane. Empress Diane ended the Second Interregnum by taking the throne in 300 YE, primarily in response to increased Orc aggression. Her early reign was taken up with organising a fractious and complacent Senate, and helped a largely inexperienced military council deal with the dual threat of Grendel invasions along the southern coast and a major effort by the Druge in the Barrens to claim Dawnguard. 322 to 324 YE. The Orc Rebellion. Prior to 322 YE, many Orcs that were defeated in battle were enslaved. Orcs had no rights in the Empire before this time, as they were not considered people in the eyes of the Constitution. There were slave populations in Dawn, Wintermark, Highguard, and especially in Varushka and the League. During this period, an Orc hero arose amongst his people, leading them in armed revolt that saw them occupy parts of Varushka, the League, Dawn, and the Marches. The freeborn Emperor Araz arranged a deal with the Orcs, and a motion to recognise them as people was brought before the Senate. The motion passed by a tiny margin, making the Imperial Orcs citizens of the Empire. 324 to 329 YE. Reign of Emperor Araz, the Liberator. The only freeborn emperor to date, Araz came to the throne with promises to end the Orc Rebellion. He did so by bringing the slaves into the Empire, and by recognizing the right of Orcs to be citizens. His reign was marked with turmoil, and he abdicated in 329 YE, a broken man. 324 to 328 YE. The Freedom Heresy. A Briar priest preaching the heretical virtue of freedom ultimately inspired an attempt to secede from the Empire. When the rebellion was defeated by Imperial forces, the priest led her followers into the Barrens, where they attempted to found a rogue state, the Kingdom of Montaigne. In 328 YE, the heretics were destroyed by barbarian Orcs, and in 329 the ringleaders of the heresy were tried and executed for heresy and blasphemy. Decline. In 331 YE, the decline begins. In 331 YE, the territory of Spiral was lost to Urizen. This marked the start of the current period, called the Decline. A greedy and corrupt Senate, more concerned with internal political manoeuvring than the strength of the Empire, supported two weak occupants of the throne, Empressgisele de Savos and Emperor Hugh the Ill-Prepared of House Roussillon, and a third catastrophically incompetent emperor. The weak and self-indulgent Naga-lineaged Emperor Walter, who did not enter the Senate once during his 2-year reign. The Synod was mostly concerned with dogmatic disputes and began to lose sight of its mission. In 346 YE, the territory of Holberg was lost to the barbarians. This triggered a defensive mindset and a period of recriminations. More territories were lost, leading to the further defensiveness and less inter-nation cooperation. The generals of the military council found it impossible to collaborate effectively during this period. The addition of the first Imperial Orc generals in 351 YE simply made the matters worse. Several more territories on the edges of the Empire were also lost during this time. 331 to 346 YE. Reign of Empressgisele, the Unwise. Empressgisele de Savos of the League took the throne following the loss of Spiral in 331 YE, and despite some early efforts entirely failed to retake that territory. Her reign was marked with a period of political upheaval, largely caused by the Empress herself, whose blatant favouritism towards the League split the Senate and the Synod, and caused problems amongst the generals and the archmages. Her reign ended with her death during the Battle of Holberg, which saw that territory lost to the Empire. 348 to 368 YE. Reign of Emperor Hugh, the ill-prepared. After the death of Empressgisele de Savos, Hugh de Roycelon of Dorne took the crown. Nephew of the Dornish general Leon de Rousselon, and a noble of a politically and militarily powerful Dornish noble house, Hugh was a personable, enthusiastic, and idealistic knight, with extensive battlefield experience. Unfortunately, he was an absolutely abysmal administrator, incapable of delegation, torn between the realities of political life and his personal idealism. His reign was marked by a dizzying number of feasts, banquets, and tourneys, during which he desperately tried to woo an increasingly jaded Imperial Senate, as well as a sequence of crushing military defeats as generals began to compete with each other over dwindling resources. By the end of his reign, the Emperor was almost unrecognizable as the energetic young man he had been when he took the throne. Decades of feasting had left him corpulent and unhealthy, barely able to fit into his harness. Trying to stay ahead of the manipulations and machinations of the Senate had left him exhausted and despondent. According to those that saw him in the fateful battle for Karsk that spelled the end of his reign and ultimately his life, he was a broken man who embraced the peace offered by death. The crows gather. Emperor Hugh's reign was marked by a catastrophic sequence of defeat, military blunders, and loss of territories. Almost as soon as he gained the throne in 349 YE, the Navarre territory of Leathaven was conquered by the Jotun. They moved quickly to capitalize on their unexpected attack, efficiently conquering the Mournwald by the end of the year. In 363 YE, Segura was conquered by a unified force of orcs from the Lassambrian hills. Efforts to push into Karaman, Feroz, and Madruga were repulsed by Imperial forces, but disorganized attempts by the Empire to recapture the westernmost territory met with abject failure. 4 years later, the Druge launched an attack previously considered impossible. Striking through the great forest of Paytat from the barons, they quickly overwhelmed the defenders of Rykos, conquering the territory by the close of 367 YE. Finally, in 368 YE, the Thule joined the attack against the Empire, seizing the northern parts of the eastern territory of Karsk from Barushka, Hugh himself died during a desperate attempt to drive back the Orcs of Odgadov. 371 to 373 YE. The reign of Emperor Walter, the Ham-Fisted. Emperor Walter Upwald was a Marcher Naga who took the throne under dubious circumstances and was widely considered to be a disaster for the Empire. Under his reign, the Senate fell even further into open bickering and factionalism. He choked to death on an olive pit in 373 YE during a state dinner with a group of Sarkovan and Yarmite diplomats. In the final year of his reign, the Thule continued their attack across the northern borders of the Empire, taking control of the Wintermark territory of Skarsind. Some scholars speculate that the suspicious circumstances surrounding his death may have been linked to the loss of the Wintermark holdings there. Resurgence 374 to 376 YE. Coronation of Empress Britta, the young Empress. A Steiner woman named Britta became the 19th Empress. In the wake of the disastrous Emperor Walter, who was already being termed the Ham-Fisted, she took up the sword and shield and challenged the corruption of the Senate and Synod. She surrounded herself with competent generals and began to formulate and prosecute a campaign to recover lost territories and drive the barbarians back. A popular and charismatic figure, she united the people of the Empire behind her and dealt ruthlessly with her enemies. She had the wisdom to select competent advisors. People began to call her the young Empress, and hailed her as a reincarnation of the first Empress, come to protect the Empire in its time of need. 376 YE. Death of the young Empress. Empress Britta was killed during a disastrous attempt to retake Skarsind. Perhaps galvanized by this, the fastest campaign of conquest in Imperial history saw 5 territories previously lost returned to the Imperial fold. In the 3 years after her death, Skarsind, Karsk, Segura, Holberg, and Rykos were all recaptured. 380 to 383 YE. Reign of Empress Lisabetta, Empress of Flowers. Appointed by the Senate at the spring equinox, Lisabetta Giacomi von Holberg of the House of Seven Mirrors claimed she was inspired by her countryman, the intellectual Emperor Frederick, and by the example of the glorious Empress Rothschild, paragon of pride. And there we have it. A somewhat brief and quite a bit more bullet-pointed overview of the history of the Empire. There is much more to this, of course, on the wiki. You can certainly delve deep and find a lot more interesting information about each and every throne and all of the interregnums. But it's a very good start if these are the points that you remember. As I said before, I have left the link to this page in the description below if you want to read along, or if you want to delve deep and look up more about the points that I've spoken about, then a lot of those things will have links to their respective pages. So I want to say thank you once again for watching and following along with me, and hopefully, depending on what I decide the next topic to read, you will join me again sometime soon. Have a wonderful evening, and I will see you later. Goodbye.